Good morning, everyone. Going to give some time, give a few minutes for people to get into the webinar, and then we will get started shortly. Okay, we're going to get started and people can come in as well. So welcome everyone to Breaking Up Better, How to Empower Your Clients Through Their Divorce. A few housekeeping things before we get started and I introduce all of our panelists. If you have questions as we go through, please enter them in the Q&A, and if they make sense to be answered, throughout, then I will be giving those to the panelists to answer. Otherwise, we do have some time at the end for Q&A as well. Also, this does qualify for CE credits. You do need to be here for the entire time period. We have that on our end to show. And then at the end of the webinar, when it ends, it'll show you a link that you'll need to click on to fill out your your form, and that'll give you the certificate for the CE credits. And if there's any questions, the information is there. And we'll also follow up in an email to everyone as well. We are recording the webinar, and we will make that available to everyone after as well. All right, so give me 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen and get us going. Okay, panelists, you can see that, right? All right. Okay. So for this webinar, our goal is to provide really a guide for therapists working with clients navigating divorce. So we're going to explore, emotional stages of divorce, learn some coaching-based resilience strategies, and gain an understanding of both the key legal and mediation frameworks that can impact therapeutic work. And so, for that, we've got a great panel here I have with me. As I said, my name is Amanda Singer. So I'm the founder of West Coast Family Mediation. I'm a professional family mediator. I'm a California licensed attorney and a certified divorce financial analyst. I have mediated hundreds of cases since beginning my practice in 2012, and I focus on divorce mediation, premarital and marital mediation, as well as co-parenting mediation. And I earned my JD from Chapman University, and I also have a master's in dispute resolution from Pepperdine's Strauss Institute. And I am excited to have here with me these wonderful panelists. The first one we have is we've got Christina Treddy. Christina is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she's the founder of Integrative Couples Therapy in Encinitas, California. She specializes in couples in crisis, including infidelity, high conflict, and separation cases, and supports clients through relationship transitions, including co-parenting. She holds a master's in marital and family therapy from the University of San Diego, is certified in perinatal mental health, and has advanced training in emotionally focused therapy. And so Christina will be talking more about the role of a couples therapist and how what that looks like in the divorce process. Benjamin Yip. Ben is a certified family law specialist and an experienced family law attorney and partner with Wilkinson and Finkbeiner. And he is dedicated to helping clients navigate divorce with integrity and perspective. He has a strong belief that family disputes are best resolved outside of court court whenever possible. So he does focus on educating clients on how to minimize conflict and emotional fallout, especially when children are involved. However, he also is a great litigator if that is necessary in cases, as it sometimes is. He's known for his balanced approach and making sure to help clients weigh the true cost of litigation, financial, emotional, and relational, against the benefits of resolution. And we'll be talking more about what the attorney's lens is like, helping therapists understand a little bit more about that process, as well as understanding, like we talked about, like he said, how do you weigh those true costs. And then last, definitely not least, I have India Kern. India is a certified divorce coach. She's an author, speaker, and founder of Surviving the Unwanted Divorce. Through her coaching practice, she helps clients regain clarity, confidence, and calm during the divorce process. Drawing on her own experience and years of supporting individuals through high conflict separations, India combines emotional intelligence with actionable strategies, guiding clients to make informed decisions, communicate effectively, and rebuild their lives on a solid foundation of emotional understanding. Her book, Surviving the Unwanted Divorce, serves as a roadmap for those navigated unexpected endings, providing readers with tools to transition from chaos to clarity. And India is passionate about helping clients understand high conflict dynamics, manage emotional triggers, and master communication with challenging individuals. So this wonderful panel is going to provide all different insights into the divorce process. And so I'm going to pass it over to Christina to start off and give us, oh, do I have this? There we go. To give us and talk about a therapist's perspective. Christina?
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks, Amanda. So, for anyone that has worked with a client going through a divorce, whether that's an adult individual or a couple or a child or even a family, you all probably know that it is an intensely emotional time. And as therapists, we are very well equipped to help support our clients with the emotional roller coaster ride that divorce can be. And I think one of the things that's the most important to do is to be able to first, on our own, understand that your clients will be going through the stages of grief. And so it's normal to expect and to see our clients experiencing denial and shock, anger and blame. There might be times that they come into session actually feeling really angry. They're in a lot of they're really struggling to accept it. They're experiencing shock. It can be a really emotionally dysregulating time. And then the next session, they come in and they're trying to do everything they possibly can to save the marriage. Then the next session, they might come in and you might notice them in a state of depression. And then the next session they come in, they might be in a place of acceptance. And sometimes they're going through all of this at different points in time within a single session. So our job as therapists really is to be this secure base and be the steady person that they can count on and rely on as they're going through all of the different stages of grief. Um, and then in addition to that, it's really important to also, though, still hold hope that they have the resilience and the capacity and the ability to rebuild their life. So, I think if we're working with, in a moment, we'll talk a little bit about the differences between working with individuals and couples, but at the very start, just expect there to be a lot of emotional dysregulation, and it's our job to be there with them on their very worst days. Can you do the next slide, Amanda? So, if you are working with an adult individual, a big piece of the work really is on normalizing this grief process and validating the emotional experience that they're having. And I'm trained in emotionally focused therapy, so that is my orientation that I utilize in my work with clients. But of course, if that's not your orientation, you would use whatever model that you rely on to guide your work. In addition to providing the space for them to process their grief, it's very important to also help them find a sense of empowerment, find the ground underneath their feet, and be able to advocate for themselves, understand healthy boundaries, and really get a grounding on what it is that they need to do next. One of the things that I think is so incredibly devastating about going through a divorce for a lot of people is that it's not only that they're losing their romantic partner, but so many changes are starting to happen. They're often facing financial changes, lifestyle changes. They're facing sometimes the reality of moving into a new home. They sometimes are getting used to single parenting. Uh, there's so many different disruptions to their life, and at the same time, they still have to get up, go to work, take care of the kids, do all of the things that they typically have to do. So it can be a really wild time. But again, that's where, on the one hand, we want to hold space for everything that they're feeling while also finding that bit of hope and empowerment and helping them rebuild their identity. Um, there's one more thing that I want to mention on this too, and this is true, I think, if you're working with an individual or a couple, and that is that there's time and space to really be there for them on the emotional level and hold all of the feelings that they're feeling and really be able to help them get through that time. But at the same time, there's a lot to do. There's decisions to make. There's financial elements to this that have to be looked at and resolved. There's paperwork that has to get filled out. There's appointments that have to be made with mediators or attorneys or divorce coaches, right? So I like to see myself as one, I'm there for them on the emotional level, and two, I'm helping nudge them along to make sure that they're carving out time in their life to do the things that they need to do. And then can we look at the next one too? So if you're working with a couple, the orientation is a little bit different. This is the majority of the work that I do because I am a couples therapist. I do individual work, but I primarily am a couples therapist. And it is a little bit different than working with an individual. Typically, when I'm working with a couple, and they decide to get a divorce, that often happens in their process of working with me. So I might be the first person that even knows about the divorce. Sometimes the decision is made in my room on my couch. Sometimes it's made in between sessions. And so there tends to be a session or two or a few even where there is again this stages of grief that they're both going through and they're trying to grapple with what to do. But then as soon as a decision is made, as if they're going to keep working with me, my lens changes to I want to help both of them make this transition from being a romantic couple to co-parents. And one of the best ways that I've been able to do that has been able to be teaching them a little bit more about their negative interactional pattern, helping them develop skills and tools to be able to communicate differently. And then I'm able to really be this source of secure regulation and a safe base for them so they can leave session and then go and do the things that they need to do as they're moving through their divorce process. One of the most important elements of my work is on helping the couple keep their children, if they have them, in the center of the process. As we know, when couples are going through the pain and loss of divorce, it can lead to a lot of reactivity and it can lead to behaviors that unfortunately are not good for the children. So, what I do as a couples therapist is I work really, really hard at emphasizing over and over and over again that they want to be able to work as a team, that they want to be able to make decisions together. So that way they are in alignment on the well-being of their kids. When I'm working with a couple, I'm not spending as much time helping them process the pain, the grief, and the loss. That I really find is better suited for their individual therapist or their divorce coach. So my focus really is on helping them communicate differently, helping them make decisions, and helping them feel better equipped to go and do the things that they need to do outside of my room. So yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina.
Yeah.
I think that you touched on a couple of really important things that I, wanted to bring up a little bit more on. One of those is, when you talk about needing to carve out time to do stuff, right? It is a lot. There is a lot of time and work that can go into what needs to be done for a divorce. And from all of our perspectives, we'll talk a little bit about that in different ways. But one of the things that, I see as a mediator is that you can tell when people have support and somebody kind of helping them move them through the process versus when they don't have anyone. And, that a lot of times it becomes they're just, some people stick their head in the sand and they don't want to deal with it and don't think about it. Other people, I have clients who are like, I refuse to upload any of my financial information. I'm not going to do it. They can, you can't make me do it, like that kind of thing. And I think it goes in line with what you've talked about the different emotions that they're going through with it. And so, I see in my role that it moves much smoother in terms of them doing all of that work when they do have support in other places besides just mediation.
Yes, I mean, I think that and I could see that. And I think that part of what I'm trying to do too is I'm asking the questions and I'll ask, so how's it going in terms of, where are you at in your mediation process? Or what is something that you talked about when you were working with the attorney? What came up in your last session with your divorce coach? Just to make sure that I'm on the same page with the other professionals that are working with them, and then also to help ensure that they're slowly taking the steps that they need to take. And I found too that when my clients balance, on the one hand, the grief, the loss, the processing that they need to do in order to move through that time while also taking steps, they get through it with more resilience and ease. And
Mm-hmm.
that when they avoid it or deny it or numb it, which is all normal, they're going to do
Mm-hmm.
all of that. But when that goes on for too long, it seems like it can create a lot more, distress for my clients.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And I think to your point, Christina, you mentioned something that I think is important for all therapists is that you do understand the different roles in a divorce process. And so you know what your role is
Hmm.
as the couples therapist or individual if you were, but you are able to speak with them knowledgeably and understanding when they might want to go to their divorce coach or when they might be going to their divorce attorney and when they might be doing in mediation. And I think that can be really helpful because they feel heard and they also you're helping them go to the right person. Whereas, therapists who maybe haven't had that education and understanding, they may not know, well, which questions do you go to the specific individuals? And so that's part of what we're doing today, right?
Yes.
Is providing that knowledge. But I think that's really important. And one last thing, I realized we didn't have it on the slides, but I wonder if you take a couple minutes. I know that you do discernment counseling as well, and I think that that's something that I think even therapists might not know what it is. Could you take a couple minutes and talk a little bit about that and how that might fit into the process as well?
Yes. So discernment counseling is a very specific protocol that is utilized when a couple, well, there's one person in the partnership that is leaning out of the divorce, and there's one person, or that's leaning out and considering divorce. They don't know if they want to do couples therapy or not. And then there's one person that's leaning in. They desperately want to save the marriage. When these couples end up in couples therapy tends to not be very effective because one person is showing up to couples therapy, but they don't even know if they want to stay married. They might not necessarily be ready to take steps towards ending the divorce either, but they're not in a spot where they're ready to work on their marriage. And so discernment counseling is a short-term process. It's anywhere from 1 to 5 sessions. And the goal of it is to help the couple by the time they're finished with discernment counseling to get clear on, do we just want to stick with the status quo? Maybe we're not in a good spot, but we don't have the time, energy, or resources to work on it, nor do we maybe have the time, energy, or resources to separate or get a divorce. Or they make a decision to spend 6 months working with a couples therapist and really doing everything they can to improve their relationship. And during that 6 month period, they put divorce off the table. Or are they ready now to take steps towards separation or divorce? So it can really be helpful for people that are stuck in ambivalence and just, get them into a place where they're at least making one movement, even if the movement is we're not going to make a decision right now, but to hopefully move them out of that place of chronic ambivalence.
Yeah. Thank you,
Yeah.
Christina. I think that's
Yeah.
helpful because I know when I first learned about discernment counseling, I hadn't known about it before, but it made a lot of sense to
Yes.
figure it out. What does that look like? And I think that as therapists, when working with clients, if you see that as something maybe they could need, being able to understand that there are options out there different from what you might have known before.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
great. Thank you. All right. Now I'm going to pass it over to Ben, and Ben is going to talk more about the attorney's role and share with us more on that side.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And that was really interesting, Christina, about that discernment counseling. Because when people come to my office, I get them in all various stages of the divorce process. It can be they're still thinking about it, they're not sure, they just want to get basic information on what a divorce looks like, or they've been separated for, I had one honestly was separated for 10 years and they just never pulled the trigger on getting the paperwork started. And that's really my role is to help them with the paperwork process to get them to the finish line, which ultimately is divorce. Paperwork that is required from court is pretty self-explanatory, and I'm going to provide that context to kind of show where I think a lot of overlap is with the other professionals in the therapeutic setting fit in. So at the very beginning, to get things started, just like a civil lawsuit, family law is an offshoot of civil cases. It starts with somebody suing somebody else. So you're going to start with a petition for dissolution. So one party actually has to open a case with the courthouse, pay a filing fee, and get a case number. Once they get that case number, I like to tell my clients, imagine getting an empty banker's box at the courthouse where you can ask the court or you can come up with any agreements to fill that box up that help the court move this case forward or help you guys move this case forward. And once you've resolved the issues in question, then and only then can you put a lid on that box and call it closed, because that's when you enter a final judgment. So there's six main things that a court wants to see resolved before they put the lid on that box. Okay. The first one would be if there's kids. So custody and visitation, child support, spouse support, dividing your assets and debts, terminating your marital status, and then last but not least, if there's any attorney's fees for my time or my counterpart's time or anybody's time, and if that gets resolved one way, shape, or form through an agreement or through a trial. Okay. Once those six issues are resolved adequately, then a lid can go on the box and a final judgment can be entered with the court. So that's where the paperwork starts. It starts with a petition where somebody's going to mark what they want for all those various categories if they're applicable. And then that petition has to get served to the other side to give the other side notice that they're being sued for this divorce. And that other side, we like to call them the respondent because now they have to respond to a petitioner's, I guess, lawsuit, in this case, that divorce. So a once that respondent has been served, they've got 30 days to turn around a response to the petition for dissolution. Otherwise, the petitioner has the right to ask for a default judgment and have a court grant what they've asked for in their petition to be a judgment where they put the lid on the box. A lot of things can happen with that judgment. So I like to say it's never a hard judgment for at least a period of a year. Sometimes it can go all the way to 18 months, depending on the situation. But that's really important to know because a lot of times people will get served with a document and it will be 45 days into it. And then they're going to turn around and say, well, if I don't do anything, Aren't they going to get everything that they asked for in the petition? Yes and no. The respondent, if they respond in time, they can go ahead and set aside any judgment that may or may not have been entered. And there's different ways to go about it where they can definitely reopen the case essentially, okay? Or put a pause to the process of the judgment. All right. Now, in order for a court to even allow a petitioner to go forward with a default judgment, that petitioner has to do one other thing besides serving the petition and giving notice of the lawsuit, in this case, the divorce. They've also got to send to the other side a snapshot of their financial history or where they're at financially. That includes assets and debts and their income. Only then can a court say that they can enter a default judgment. Only then, once that petitioner has sent that information to the other side, only then can the case actually move forward to resolution, which would be a judgment. Okay. Now, that's the context. All right. So you've got to do open a case, a petition. You've got to get that petition served. And then petitioner has to serve those financial documents, which we call disclosures. Okay. Once those three things are done, then you can start looking at the finish line. You can always get to the finish line a lot of different ways. I like to tell my clients that they have more control over the outcome of their case if they're able to come to a compromise. And I was told a long time ago by a long time practicing family law attorney that became a judge, sat at the bench for a long time, said, a compromise is an ill-fitting suit that suits everyone. And it doesn't fit well, but it'll fit. And that's what a compromise is supposed to be. It's not 100% of everything you want, nor 100% of everything the other side wants. It's just close enough to make it acceptable. And I tell my clients that's infinitely better for you than to go through the rigmarole of going to a trial and paying for the time it takes to prepare for that trial and then banking that that judge in their infinite wisdom is going to make an order that favors what it is that you're asking for. So rather than put it on a third party that may or may not have had the time to look over everything that you put in front of them, I always tell my clients, try your best to come to resolution on your own or through mediation. Work something out to deal with custody visitation, to deal with child support, deal with spouse support, to even deal with your assets and debts. So right from the get-go, depending on where my client that comes in and talks to me is at, I kind of already start to tell them, if you don't have a therapist or you're not working with a therapist, you need to do that right away. You may not recognize it, but a lot of the anxiety of the process it isn't just about the process of divorce. It's also what your future holds in store, what grief you're probably processing. I have a lot of clients that come in and they are extraordinarily successful professionally, and they have never failed at anything that they've ever done in their lives. And so when they come in and they say they're needing a divorce, it's a personal failure to them and they need help processing that. So a therapist will do that. I think a divorce coach definitely can help them with that because some of these people they have those personality types that are just very triggering for other people, like narcissists. And narcissists they don't fail. Narcissists succeed 100% of the time, even when they fail. And that's the kind of personality type that we deal with on the day to day as divorce attorneys, either with our own clients or on the other side. Because you have to look at it like this. Most of the time, people don't look at each other and just go, yeah, I want to get a divorce. And I think you agree to that. I think it's usually somebody wants out, the other person is kind of left holding the bag going, why? And depending on who we have, kind of depends on where we go with our recommendations for, I guess, therapy and support. And also, it deals with a lot with what we do next to help them through the process. Like, for instance, if I have a client who is what we're going to call the in spouse, the person that makes all the money, okay? Um, they need to be recognizing that, well, the outspouse, the person that doesn't make any money, is probably really, really nervous about what their future holds regarding their finances. So we will take steps immediately to address that. Um, if there's kids involved, we automatically start to figure out immediately what does the day-to-day look like for these kids? How do we position this family into a two household family and keep the kids the center of any agreement and what is in their best interest for those kids? Is it continuity and stability where they're walking to and from school like they always have been? Or are they old enough now for, a 25-minute commute a couple times a week, depending on where the other parent has decided to relocate? So these are all considerations, and having experts such as Christina and India and Amanda help my clients navigate those difficult conversations and those decisions. So I think also it's really nice that we are able to work with these other experts to help those clients because we can bring things up to our clients and then say you should work on that with that communication with your therapist. You probably need help co-parenting. You probably need help with your tone of your messages to the other side. A lot of the tone that you're saying things in and that you're messaging in the different co-parenting apps comes across a little aggressive. You might want to tone that down, and you might want to talk through some of those feelings that you have. So that's the basic role that I think I have and where we're at with being a divorce attorney. There
Ben,
is a question here.
yeah, I was gonna say there was a good question for you that I thought would be good to answer. Says, as an attorney, how do you communicate to your clients that they may need a divorce coach or a therapist to handle some of the difficult challenges of the process? Do you find some pushback, and how do you frame it as additional support?
Well, I definitely always make it a point to tell my clients when they first meet with me that if they don't have somebody they're speaking with regularly, offering them therapeutic advice or counseling, they should find that because as put together as they may feel, this process is not going to turn out 100% the way they think it's going to turn out. No matter how good I am, no matter how great of a presentation I might put in front of a judge, no matter how great we are at working with the other side, there's always twists and turns. You have no control over the other side. You have no control over the reactions. And the only thing you can control is yourself. And you need help controlling yourself because it's going to be emotional. And if anybody tells you it's not going to be emotional, I think they're pulling the wool over your eyes and just telling you that they got oceanfront property in Arizona is just a matter of time. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's funny.
Um, I like this slide a lot, Amanda, because it really, really drives home the way I think my firm practices, and hopefully a lot of other firms are focused on, which is if you are on the high road, which we always like to litigate from, and always like to practice from and educate our clients from, you're never going to be fighting uphill. It's always a downhill fight so that you position yourself and your clients in a way that the request, if you ever have to go to court, are requests because you simply cannot get them to something reasonable. Okay. If you're from the high road, your request will generally be reasonable because to take the high road to even get there requires a lot of sacrifice. And you have to be able to convince your clients that that sacrifice is worth it to be up here rather than consistently fighting in the trenches down here. Fighting in the trenches, it goes along with the last bit on the slide, the true cost of emotions. Another longtime family court judge told me once when he would have a client come into his office steaming hot, very angry with the other side because of the nonsense that they pulled. They want to fight back. They want to bulldog. They want to get aggressive with court. He would look them in the eye and just ask them point blank, how much is your mad worth? Because that is ultimately the question. How much is that anger worth for you to exact what it is you're asking about for me to make that happen in court? I don't like to fight out of emotion. I don't like to go to court unless I think it's necessary in order for us to resolve something to get us closer to the finish line, which ultimately is the divorce, right? People aren't coming here because they want to fight about a bunch of stuff. They ultimately want to get a divorce. And that's why I think it's really important to set the stage for them through therapy, through working with the divorce coach, through mediation, they can get to that finish line often cheaper and often quicker than if they were to fight every single fight and try and be the winner in everything. And I often tell people up front, if they think there's a winner and a loser in a divorce case, they're right. The only winners in a divorce case are the attorneys, people like me, because the more you fight, the more fees I'm going to rack up. And I am sensitive to that fact. I'm sensitive to the fact that oftentimes I'm litigating with people's futures. If it's not their retirements, it's their future of their kids, it's their college funds they've set aside. I don't want to pay for my kids' tuition using their kids' tuition. I'm going to counsel them, find a better way to come to a compromise, exhaust all avenues first before you walk into court. Because if you walk into court and you're mad and all you have is mad, you're going to lose every single day because you got stuck in the trench as opposed to fighting from the high road. The other thing I also like to talk to my clients about is every decision you make, regardless of if it seems innocuous, from where it is that you might want to move to, where vacations you might want to plan, when you want to plan those vacations, what you want to do moving forward with your life, separate and beyond from this family. I always bring it back to what would that impact have on your kids, right? If there's kids, how old are those kids? Are they little ones in elementary school, or are they really, really little ones and they're in preschool? Or are they like 16 and 17, in which case, good luck. You're 16 and 17, 15-year-old, they're going to do what they want to do, and you're not going to have any control over that. So I often tell my clients, like yesterday, I had a client tell me, well, I'm tired of paying rent for my house where I'm at right now. My 16-year-old son barely stays with me. I'm thinking about moving in with my girlfriend and saving on some rent and on those types of costs so I don't have to do that. And my first response to him was, that's great. That's probably fiscally responsible, but how is that going to play with your ex who is already mad at you for having that girlfriend because she thinks you cheated on her with that girlfriend? How is that going to play out? And he said, that's probably a good idea. I probably shouldn't do that right now. That's probably not in my best interest to upset that apple cart if everything is going
Mm,
smoothly. So
yeah.
my role, I think, is very much a how does everything fit into this context of where we're at in court in terms of paperwork? And then how do we keep this pushing forward to get to the finish line and get that final judgment? And how do we work with all the other professionals involved too?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ben. That was great to be able to walk through and understand that process better. And I think one of the things when you talked about the costs, right? You talked about especially the financial cost. And one of the things I see, as a mediator is, knowing which professional to go to for certain things will save you money, right? Like, there are issue, if you come to your attorney more prepared, and India is going to talk more about how a coach can help with that. But if you come prepared with your questions, if you are dealing with the emotions with your therapist and you're doing all of that, you're not going to have as high of attorney fees because you're going to use your attorney for the right things, and that's going to cost you less. So, sometimes I think to the question about like, how do you suggest that they use, having a coach, having a therapist, I will often let people know that you may think more professionals sounds like more money, but it's actually going to end up costing you less money because you're going to use the right professionals for the right times, and you're not going to use your attorney for everything when, I hate to say it, but your attorney's fee is probably going to be the highest hourly rate that you have. So, keeping that in mind. I know we have some questions about periods. I'm going to save that for later. I was also going to share a little bit about there's a new joint petition in California as well, so we can talk about that in the Q&A. But I'll make sure we answer that. But I want to pass it
Cool.
over to India. India is going to share more with us about the role of a divorce coach.
Yeah, so I love what you're saying about investing on the front end. So you will actually save on the back end. I always talk about that, investing in yourself. And even though it seems like you have a team, it can bring the support you need, and you probably will save money later. And you won't look back on divorce with regret. So, hi everyone. My name is India Curran. I'm a certified divorce coach. A lot of people don't really know what we do. So, I hope by the end of today's presentation, you'll understand. A divorce coach and a therapist have very little overlap. And I'll say it very simply. A therapist is going to look back and look at the past and look at the family of origin to ask the question, why? Why did I marry the person I did? However, the divorce coach is not going to go there. The divorce coach is going to look at the client and say, okay, you're at point A. We got to get to point B. How is the question? How are we going to get there? So there's a lot of game planning, strategizing, communicating better, more effectively. That's the kind of stuff we do. So let's start looking at how I typically work with clients so you can better understand the role of a divorce coach. So when we are looking at a client, I usually deal with the spouse that is struggling more than the other. Typically in divorce, there's usually one that struggles more than the other. That is who I work with most of the time. So it's a lot of regaining clarity. And here's the thing, I don't know if many of you, I don't know your age, but back in the 80s, there used to be a commercial. This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Well, this is your brain. This is divorce. This is your brain during divorce. And that's what I'm going to share with you, because your brain kind of exits. Because when you are going through high stress, you're going through that life transition. It's number two, right? Divorce is second to death. So what happens is your amygdala, I know we have a lot of therapists on the line, so you know what the amygdala is doing. It's on fire and is processing danger and is basically saying, you better run because you are in serious danger. So we call it reptilian brain. So if you think about a reptile, a lizard runs, a lion attacks, and a possum freezes. That's what we do in survival mode. But here's the kicker. A lot of times our advocate, our attorney, our mediator, our therapist, or even divorce coach become a threat. So we are in high alert. So my job is to help bring it down to homeostasis, because when you're in that high alert survival mode, all you do is make emotional decisions, which can lead to financial mistakes. So what I like to say is I lend my executive brain function to my client so they can make logical decisions. Because when they are going through this life transition, the first thing that goes is the power of decision. So we're asking a person to make the most critical decisions of their life when they can't think, when they have foggy brain. So that's what a divorce coach does. They come alongside that person. They help bring logic into the room. So when they go see Ben, when they go see Amanda, they are not bringing emotion. So I like to say I prepare them emotionally for the business of divorce. So oftentimes they are in a high conflict situation, relationship. If you go on Instagram, you would think everyone walking around is a narcissist. We all know that's not true, but about 10% of the population is. A lot of times I get the client that is usually the codependent dealing with the high conflict person. So there's strategy in communication when they are having to talk about to the soon to be ex about the children, about co-parenting. The good news is high conflict people are very predictable. So there's a formula to even the way the cadence, the way the email should be written. Oftentimes my clients come to me and say, how should I respond? Sometimes it doesn't even warrant a response. And so, it's taking that effective communication and helping them understand that there's a way to react, versus respond. I want them to respond. So I bring effective communication into the room, and I do that by, it's called 3 steps to de-escalate. So I like to compare what my clients are going through with their ex or soon to be ex, like they're in a tug of war. So both sides are pulling, and the best way to get out of that is to drop the rope. So that's what I help coach them do. And that's, again, lending my executive brain function to them so that they can communicate more effectively and possibly reach resolution. So moving along through here, a lot of my clients have lost, they're having an identity crisis. I often hear, this is not the way life was supposed to happen. Well, this is true, but we can either argue with reality, or we can look at, from this point forward, what do we do? I often say, ask the question, how can I improve the situation without the other person changing? That is such a valuable question because it requires introspection. And, oftentimes these people have been doing this dance for many years. We often marry our unfinished business. So they have this dynamic, and we're trying to unwind it. And oftentimes they're oblivious to the dynamic that's going on. And therapists know this the best. They are constantly bringing attention to this. So when we do this, here, you can go on to the next slide, Amanda. When we're doing this, we have to, I'm going to skip one, to managing triggers. Because if you're doing this dance with your spouse, you are reacting, and there's a way to respond. So we start identifying the triggers, because when you know better, you do better, right? So I have practices, I have exercises that I do with my clients so they can identify what is really getting them and snagging them, so the next time it happens, because it will happen again, they can handle it better and they can respond. And when these clients are in this high stress situation, many times they want to distract themselves with pleasure. So I help them avoid those roadblocks. And I look at it like this. There's 3 buckets. There's the physical, there's the emotional, and the spiritual. And we need to counterbalance in each one. I know many of you probably know situations where the first thing that happens when the people are separated or divorced is they want to go date. And that is not always the wisest decision, because we're again distracting ourselves with pleasure rather than looking introspectively. So when we counterbalance, and part of what I coach my clients on is looking at these 3 buckets and asking, what's the one thing I can do to improve my physical health? Maybe I'm overindulging. Maybe I'm drinking too much, maybe even doing drugs. What can I do to improve that? The emotional bucket, this is where therapy comes in too. Therapy and coaching combined are a wonderful support for people going through divorce. Most of my clients have a therapist. That's a question. Can I have a therapist and a coach? Of course you can. Again, it's going back to that investing in yourself on the front end, so you'll be better on the back end after the finish line of divorce. And then the last one is the spiritual bucket. This doesn't necessarily mean faith, but it can. It's more of just being still, understanding, maybe journaling, meditating, and just sitting with your pain. I know is uncomfortable as that is, it's how we heal. So that's part of what I do. And then creating structure, accountability. I'm like an accountability partner. So when they meet with me, then the next week or the next 2 weeks, when I see them again, we go over what we had previously planned. Like, what's that one thing that you set for your physical health that you could improve? How did it go? We start looking at that. And we start also, and I think this is one of the most important things, is we have a vision for the future. You don't get what you don't aim for. So if you don't have a vision, you're not going anywhere. So I think it's incredibly important to know what you want your life to look like in 6 months or a year, and start thinking that way so you can reach that goal. And lastly is assembling a dream team. Many times I am the first point of contact, much like Christina. Sometimes I have people come to me on the fence, and in no way am I an advocate of divorce. In fact, oftentimes I refer therapists to my clients to determine if this is really something they want to do. So in being the first point of contact, I'm like a conduit to all the panelists on this webinar. I help them go to the right professionals so that they can make their divorce more successful, as crazy as that sounds. So, again, invest on the front end so you will have a more successful divorce on the back end. And lastly, the divorce coaches toolkit. Of course, we talked about behavioral management, looking at healthy responses, healthy habits, setting up a new norm because life is completely different. The emotional regulation skills, learning skills of how to effectively communicate, especially if you've been in the habit of reacting versus responding. I also didn't mention this in the high conflict situations. I am a student of Bill Eddy, who is the master of high conflict dynamics. And so we go through what would be the best response. Well, we go back to the Biff method. For those of you who don't know him, look him up. The Biff method is basically brief, informative, friendly, firm on every correspondence that you have with that high conflict person. So that's part of what I do. And then lastly, goal setting. Like I said, you don't get what you don't ask for. So you have to understand where you want to be so that you can actually strive toward it and get there. So, well, that's all I have for today. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you, India. And
Yes.
I'm sure Ben would agree with me on this one, is that like as mediators and attorneys, like we can tell when someone is working with a divorce coach and when they're not. Because as I mentioned before, like they come in more prepared, they focus on what needs to be done and, really are aware of their triggers. They're like, acknowledging what they need to do. And it can really be night and day between somebody who doesn't, especially if they don't have any support system. But I really see that a lot in the mediation sessions because they really just have a better grasp on how to handle themselves in that moment, and everything that you talked about that you help them through. So
Absolutely. It's a less expensive endeavor when you actually go to the divorce coach or a therapist because you're composed to go to the business of divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I am going to talk a little bit from the mediator's perspective, and kind of start off just generally. I find some people don't really know exactly what a mediator does. Some people are like, "Well, are you just an attorney?" People who are not therapists will ask me if I'm a therapist, and I'm not. I say as a mediator, what it is that a mediator works as a neutral third party. So even though I am an attorney, and a lot of mediators are, although you don't have to be, I am not, when I'm working as a mediator, I'm not wearing an attorney hat. I am also not wearing a CDFA hat, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is too. But really, I'm neutral. I don't represent either of them individually, and often they will have their own attorneys, and so they will consult with somebody through the process, or even they might bring their attorney into mediation because they find that would help them in the process. And even I've had people who brought their divorce coach into a mediation session, because that is what they need in that moment. But as that neutral third party, I am not there to tell them what to do. I'm not a judge. So, it's different. When you go to court, the judges is telling you this is what's going to happen. In mediation, my role is to facilitate the conversation between the two of them. I always say that, like, I can say the exact same thing that one of my clients says to their soon to be ex spouse, and it just lands very differently, right? And so, my role can be to help them with that communication, facilitate what has broken down, and help them have those conversations and then reach their resolutions, their compromises, as Ben brought up. And I liked the analogy that you used around that, Ben, because one of the things when we talk about compromise in mediation is a lot of times, and I think this is great for therapists to know, is a lot of times my clients come in and they go, well, I just want what's fair. Right. I just want whatever is going to be fair. And as some of the other professionals on this panel probably look at it, I always refer to fair as the F word in divorce, because I'm like, we're not going to use fair, because what one of the spouses thinks is fair, the other person probably doesn't. And it's very subjective. And so, the goal in mediation is to, really come up with, as it says here, like a cooperative agreement, right? So focus on, like, what are the mutual interests that they both have, and what are maybe individual interests that they both have, and really focus on it from what we call an interest-based negotiation, and looking at what those are so that we can come up with sustainable agreements that are going to benefit everyone, and especially the children, right? Like everyone here has talked about, if there are children, making sure that that's like the focus. As a mediator, I'm also, my role is to help reduce the conflict, because I get people at all different levels. So that's, I think, another sometimes misconception is people say, well, can you only mediate if you get along and you agree on everything? And the answer is no. I mean, I have some people who get along great and they are, they might take less time in mediation, but I also have still very high conflict couples who, there's a lot of conflict going on there. And so the goal is to help them with that structured dialogue, to replace any, litigation, and help reduce the hostility that exists. And then, we've already talked some about, divorce can be very expensive. And we've talked about, how you might minimize that. And, really mediation is going to significantly lower the legal expenses, because even when you have a consulting attorney, or even if you chose to bring your attorney to mediation, it's still going to reduce the overall costs. And so, as it says here, we really talk about mediation transforming divorce from a battle to be won into a problem to be solved together, because, it allows them to, really discuss that jointly. So just as talking a little bit about mediation, I wanted to go next to kind of talk about the collaborative care, right? So how do we integrate all of the different systems? And, I've kind of chimed in a little bit here throughout of ways that I see that, as a mediator, because I find that everybody has a role, and, different people are going to need different teams, but being able to kind of integrate the systems together, that's what I think can be really great for clients, is having that team and knowing, who they're going to go to. So I'm going to have each person, Christina, will come back to you to talk about, kind of go over their role a little bit and give some examples of like how it might work together. I played around with like how to make this diagram, because it was like originally the idea of like a Venn diagram, but there were 4 of us, not 3. So really just the idea that like there's places where we might overlap, and then there's places where it's like, this is what their role is. So Christina?
So one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind when you're working with your clients that are going through a divorce is which like if you're thinking about your clients that need a therapist, what kind of therapist do they need? Would it be beneficial for them to work with a therapist that can help both people in co-parenting? Would it be beneficial for each person to have their own individual therapist? If there's children involved, do one or more children need their own therapist? Would it be helpful for the family to do some family sessions together? So whether you're an individual therapist, couple therapist, child therapist, family therapist, I think it's important for us to keep in mind, like, um, do we need to make referrals to other therapists? I think another thing that's vital is to really pay attention to any symptoms of depression, people, this is sort of what Ben was talking about. Like we can have people that are incredibly successful, doing incredibly well in life, and never have maybe had mental health symptoms before. But then when they go through the stress and the crisis of divorce, they can suddenly be battling mental health conditions in a way that they never have before. So it's just something to really pay attention to and note in your work with them. Uh, like I already talked about, I think one of the things that we do best, like this is what we've been trained to do, is to really be able to help people when they're going through the hardest points of their life. And so all of our training equips us to work with clients going through divorce, and we will meet them where they're at on any given day. And then in addition to that, too, one of the things that I want to say is that it is also important that we make sure we are staying in our lane because clients will start to ask us questions that they really need to be asking a mediator or an attorney. And so that's just one of the things that I think is super important that we keep in mind is that they're going to ask us things and we might actually have some information that we want to share, but it's just always important to know, okay, is this something that I really can be sharing, or is this something that I need to tell them, hey, please bring that to your attorney, please bring that to your mediator, or again, please bring this to your divorce coach.
Absolutely, Christina. I think that's a great point, because I think I never think that it's a therapist doing it out of like actually wanting to give bad information, but I will have people come to me sometimes and say, "Well, my therapist said this about like custody, or my therapist said this about like moving out of the house," and
Mhm.
it's making sure that like they're getting the correct information first off, and two, that sometimes works them up if it's the wrong information, right? If they're
Yeah.
getting information that's not actually valid, then Ben and I are sitting here trying to help them understand what is. And so, I always think of it in the same ways of like, we're not going to be the therapist, we're not going to do that side of things. And so, I think the lanes is a really great way to look at that. Speaking of the legal side of things, Ben, pass that to you to discuss for a little bit.
Yeah, lanes are really important because I'm not a therapist and I'm not a divorce coach. And I know full well I am ill-equipped to do a lot of the hand-holding that comes with handling people's emotions. For me, when they come to me and the emotions are filtered, and so what I'm getting is just actionable or it is factual based and it's something that we're trying to massage into something actionable in court. It's a lot easier when that emotional filter is in place and they're not coming at it from a place of anger, but it becomes a reasonable suggestion or something that is strategic to get them going on that pathway to completing their divorce case. For example, like if one of the most highly charged things that a lot of people come in with is custody and visitation. And as innocuous as enrolling what school your kid is supposed to go to, it ends up being this really big knockdown, drag out fight for a lot of people. It happens when you're looking at kindergartens, looking at first grade, sixth grade when they're going to middle school, and then obviously high school. So every single time your kid is about to transition into another school, it's an opportunity for somebody to come in and say, no, 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 I don't want them to go there. And then it becomes a fight. And I can tell you from firsthand experience or experience in the field that the emotions that go with that don't play well in court. So because you want your kid to go to this particular school and you're willing to pay an arm and a leg to get them to go to that private school, doesn't mean you're going to get your choice. And that doesn't matter if it's been the school that you sent their brothers to, their sisters to. It's where your entire family went to. That's not what a judge is really thinking about. They're thinking about what is in your kid's best interest. And so we stay focused on helping you decide and articulate why your request is in your kid's best interest. And if you're unable to do that, then we will probably be the first person to tell you you're not going to get far. And the emotions that you're feeling, the anger, all of that, you need somebody else to help you process that. Somebody like Christina or India, because it's just not there. You're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And one question I had for you, I don't know if you've done this at all, is, it talks about here, of course, therapists, you guys have confidentiality obligations and attorneys have attorney-client privileges, so different things. But one of the things that can come up if a client is open to it is a client can sign a release to allow mediator or attorney or India, I don't know if you've done in the coach's role, but to speak with the therapist, and whether that's the couples therapist or whether that's an individual therapist, but there are ways for that to help the process as well. And so, I don't know, Ben or India, if you guys have done that before.
I
Uh,
have.
I have, but not in the context of a typical divorce. It's more of a one side has some mental health issues that are getting in the way of resolution for one of the issues that they need to resolve before they get to divorce. So
Mm-hmm.
we've talked and worked with mental health providers, but those are typically like psychologists and psychiatrists, and not so much as therapists because that's the level of mental illness that the other side or our client might have.
Mm-hmm. And what about for you? I mean, because I think you and I maybe are looking at different than bringing into court.
Yeah, so it wasn't a court situation. It was a very collaborative type of situation where my client, I actually referred a therapist, and then the therapist wanted to be able to speak to me. So they released, I signed, or she sent a release to me so we could
Mm-hmm.
discuss the situation. So it was a very amicable situation to help the client. It was not
Mm-hmm.
going to go to court or
Yeah.
be used in any way like that. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it from a mediator's perspective is it's more about, is it something that's going to, maybe the client can't really explain to you what, their therapist is doing, or any like insights. And sometimes that can be helpful. I've also had couples ask like to speak, like if they were in couples therapy for a long time. Sometimes it helps, especially in mediation, to understand what some of those dynamics that are not going to change just because they're getting divorced, maybe. Yeah. All right. And in India, if you want to talk more kind of from your role as well.
yeah, so the emotion's a big part of divorce, and we make actually in general 98% of our decisions are based on emotions. We're emotional beings. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then add divorce on, it's like adding kerosene to the fire. You are going to be emotional. So what happens with me is usually a client will come to the session, and I never have an agenda, but we work on what they're struggling with. What is the biggest challenge? So I'll give you an example of something that happened just recently. I had a client, and she was like, I don't care about the house. We all know how homes are huge. That's a big trigger for people. She's like, I don't care about the house, but I don't want him to have it. And so it was like, okay, well, so what I have to do, of course, I'm, in my mind going, okay, no, but I don't say that. I ask her questions. I look at the blind spots. I try to pull it out of her so she can come to her own conclusion. This probably wouldn't look so great in court. And so it's things like that as we pick apart the challenge and we look at it all different sides. So then that hopefully the client will reach the conclusion themselves through questioning. I kind of already know that it's probably not a good idea, but I'm not going to like feed it to her. I'm going to pull it out. And so, but that's a very emotional decision that we started looking at all sides. So I also saw a question, Amanda, about
Mm-hmm.
my engagement with the clients. Everyone's different. I have some that are very succinct. They come on a nice cadence. And then I have some that go like 3 months. And so we'll have a engagement of a year. But most typically it's about 6 months. And the clients that have a more successful track, I guess, with me would be 6 months, where they're coming on a nice cadence. Because if you wait too long, it's like you have to start over, and you're in completely different stage if you wait, a couple of months between sessions. So 6 months is ideal, but I do have those that linger because their divorce is going on for a
Mhm.
long time too.
Yeah. Do you find that some people need more support at the start or like certain milestones? Does
So
anything like that stick
yeah,
out?
I think, I always tell people, the start I think is the best, but at any stage, it could be like on the fence and they're trying to figure it out. And
Mhm.
like I said, I would never advocate that, but what I can do in the start, if they come to me, maybe I refer them to Christina to see if this is truly what they want to do, the couples counseling. And so, but then I have clients that have been post divorce and they're asking now what, and they're having a major identity crisis because they haven't worked in 15 years, and now they're staring down that and they don't even know where to begin. And it's the overwhelm is incredible. So a lot of it is just planning. I mean, some of it in a way steps a little into executive coaching just because they're trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do now? And like,
Mhm.
so it's definitely all stages. I think the most beneficial would be at the beginning.
Mhm. That makes sense. Well, and I wanted to say, when you're talking about the person who comes to you and says, like, I don't want the house, but I don't want, him to have it. I mean, I've seen that numerous times in mediation. And, what I will say is like, if they're working with someone like India, they're not going to come into the mediation session and say that. And trust me, I have people who do come in and say that, right? So you can just see like the change that would happen if they're talking through something with a divorce coach, and able to get to the realization that, like, okay, that might not be helpful. And, oftentimes they're then able to think about it more strategically, right? Okay, well, if the house isn't the most important thing to you, what is the most important? And so if you're in mediation, or even if you are litigating, how do you kind of use that as part of your negotiation of knowing what's important to you and what's not important to you? They're both important, because then you can figure out, how do you negotiate? How do you kind of determine, especially if the house is important to your spouse, you now know that, like, if you're willing to agree to that, they might be more willing to agree to something that you're looking for.
Right.
And, those who don't have a coach or a therapist that they're working with, and they come into the session and say that, well, now we're having to kind of deal with the ramifications that come from that, because usually that doesn't make the other person very willing to want to work with them now.
Mhm. Right, right.
Yeah. So there's a question that I thought would be great to kind of pose to everyone as well, was, from the perspective of like each of our expertise, how do you handle a divorce dynamic involving power imbalance? And this one specifically being that might occur when one of the spouses is a narcissist. Um, Although I would say to this question, we could even speak to it if they are or are not, but who controls all the funds in the marriage? So when there's
Mhm.
financial, that financial piece. India, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, that's you've pretty much described most of my clients. So what I think the main thing is I want this client to understand they have more power than they think. Even though the dynamic has been imbalanced for so long, it's now really owning that it's different now and you have more power. And let's talk about how. And so planning and understanding, like, it's a completely new norm. They are not used to this new life, so it's like writing with your opposite hand. You're getting used to this. I'm right-handed. It's like getting used to writing with my left hand, and it's a process. So, when they come to me every week, we start looking at how they're doing it, whatever that may entail. Like, say they are really not financially literate. What can you do to improve that? Is it taking a class on like Mint or some kind of, not necessarily QuickBooks, but something that could help them be more financially savvy? So it's putting power back in their corner. I often compare my clients to an empty vessel. And when they come to me, they've probably bent over backwards people pleasing, and they are spent. And so my job is helping them fill back up to the top. So that way, when they go forward, they have the strength and the power to make good decisions, but they got to fill back up before they can really do anything, and that's what I hope that I'm bringing to the table.
Thank you, India. Christina, would you like to?
Yeah, so if I'm working with a couple, which um, I'm assuming that the divorce is happening. And so if I'm working with a
Mhm.
couple and the divorce is happening and there's a power imbalance, it's highly likely that I'm actually going to refer each person to an individual therapist. There's
Mhm.
only so much work I can do with a couple where this is present before it becomes clear that it's not going to be beneficial to either person to stay in a situation to come into couples therapy with that imbalance being present. But I can certainly get both people into their own individual therapy. There might be a handful of sessions that we do together where we're really just focusing on, developing emotional regulation skills, developing coping
Mhm.
skills, talking a little bit about next steps. Also potentially looking at like me being essentially a little bit of an advocate, for the children or for the person that has at least perceived less power. But normally I'm going to be helping each person get into individual therapy.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina. And Ben, what about you? I mean, I know you're going to represent one or the other, but let's say, if you are representing the one who doesn't have control of funds.
I would, in my parlance, that would be the outspouse, the person that is
Mhm.
not with the money. So the outspouse, I would ask the question, how bad is it? Because if it's really bad and it has been bad for a really long time, like no visibility into the funds, is constantly being berated every time they have asked for funds, no access to anything at all, can't pay for living expenses. If the facts support it, I would actually entertain going forward with the domestic violence restraining order because coercive control is domestic violence. And in the situation where we're dealing with the narcissist on the other side with these types of facts, that is something to consider. It would not be my first move, but it could alleviate some of the financial stress that my outspouse client might have because with the order, you might be able to get them to stay in the house with the kids. You might be able to get the other side to continue paying for what they're supposed to have always been paying for with the filing of a divorce, along with that restraining order as well. You can get that through the initial divorce filing with the automatic temporary restraining orders that take place when the petition is started. It's on the back of the summons or it's a box that you can check when you're applying for a domestic violence restraining order. Short of those two options, if it doesn't rise to the level where we think a restraining order is warranted or necessary, immediately we would look into filing for a motion for temporary support, either child and spousal or one, depending on what the situation needs. And I think that goes a long way to addressing the financial insecurity and the anxiety that the outspouse will have in those types of situations because they can't predict or they can't see what their future is until they know what they can build with their future or build their future from. And that's the finances of this relationship. And you have a lot to overcome with that history probably of dealing with that narcissistic spouse. That narcissistic spouse probably has different things that they will say or do that are extremely triggering to the outspouse that could pull them back into a shell and withdraw from that plan or any strategy to help them build toward their future. So that's why I really like having them go to therapy, talk through it with somebody, get comfortable being uncomfortable because that's what growth takes. And you need to grow into this future. And at least that's what I would hope to be able to empower my clients with.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. And then in my role as a mediator, one of the things that we do in our process is we do individual meetings. Not all mediators will do that, but we have individual 1 hour meetings that the mediator does with each of them. And what I find is helpful for those sessions is to get some information that they might not share with you when their spouse is there. And I have questions that I ask. One of them is about like triggers. When I talk about, tell them what is it about their relationship they might want me to know. What are their goals? What are they have anxiety around? And so that kind of initial meeting gives me a little bit more understanding, because a lot of times I'll hear from someone, well, I have no idea what the finances look like. I have never had access to them either. And so then it's figuring out, how do we put a plan in place? And most of the time in mediation, it's such that I kind of look at it as like, I'm the bad guy, right? I'm the one who's going to say like, oh, you've got to upload all of your financial information. So we're putting a plan in place of what we need to do to make sure that the power imbalance, it's not going to not be there, but that we're helping try to equalize that out. And I will also, as we're discussing, talk about what are the professionals that you might need to help you through this process to make sure that you feel supported. And that's where I find, in my role, I'm often able to then explain to the other spouse like why it's a benefit to both of them, right, that their spouse has someone. And whether that's a consulting attorney, whether it's a CDFA, whether it's their coach, their therapist, like what that looks like for them as well. I think we have one more slide on here that I want to just kind of we'll talk through, and then a couple questions before we wrap up. So kind of just ending with the on here, the idea of like, how can you integrate this as clinicians, right, as therapists, and what are some tools and techniques you can do to empower your clients, and things that might make it easier as they go through the divorce process and allow you as their therapist to work with them through it, right? So whether those are worksheets, kind of helping them understand and navigate that emotional journey, whether it is about to keep teaching clients about normal divorce stages, what are those coping mechanisms, what to expect that might reduce anxiety and normalize their experiences, and even, and I imagine India, you might do this coaching as well, is role plays, right? Let's talk through practicing some healthy communication patterns, boundary settings, like helping them think through like, how are they going to react if their spouse says X when they're in mediation, or if they're in court, and making sure that they kind of can think that through. So I know we've talked through and answered some questions as we've been going. I do have one that's at least one that's still open, that was for you, Christina. So about discernment counseling, wanting to know, are there more information or further training slash classes on this? And then also, you mentioned that there's 1 to 5 sessions. Are they very structured? Maybe just a little bit more of what that looks like.
There's only one place to do discernment counseling training, and that's I think it's discernmentcounseling.com.
Okay.
So I think, but if someone Googles it, they should be able to find where that training happens. And yes, and it is structured. It's very structured. There's a very specific protocol that's followed, and it's an online training. It's very extensive. So yes. And then was
Yeah.
there another question in there, Amanda?
We got through most of them. One of the ones I did want to, I know, Ben, you answered a clarification question about like 30 days that the respondent has and all of that. One of the things I wanted to bring up that we were talking about, Ben talked about what the process looks like to start filing for divorce. And one of the changes that came about at the beginning of this year is that California now actually has a joint petition. in addition to the regular petition response process that Ben laid out for you. And so, it's not going to be right for everyone, but especially for my clients that are working together in mediation, a joint petition allows them to file together. So one person becomes petitioner one and one person becomes petitioner two, and they are both signing and filing for divorce together. And so one of the things that does is nobody has to be served. And even though in my practice we would always, do service by mail, I mean, that can still be triggering for people, right? If you've ever seen the divorce documents, and if you haven't and you want to, feel free to reach out. But they do say you are being sued. They have a summons that go along with them. And it's just, I do find, I found that a lot of times people would get really concerned about what was happening when they were served. And so with the joint petition, they don't have to be served. They're moving forward together. And so, that's one of those things where if you have clients that are wanting to work together, starting that from the beginning can be the best way to do it, as opposed to, one person does hire an attorney, they file a regular petition, the other person gets served, and now they just feel like, oh, I have to find an attorney, and they may find an attorney who is much more aggressive and isn't going to, work together with the other side. A question that came in was, many of my clients separating or divorcing often want support groups. Any resources for finding divorce support groups? India, I'll start with you because I know you've got.
So I used to lead one. It's called divorcecare.org.
Okay.
So that's how you find the meetings.
Mhm.
So that's a really good one. It's the oldest support group for divorce. They started in the 90s.
Okay, so that was divorcecare.org.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Christina,
And
do you? Oh,
yeah, that's it. That's it.
yeah.
There is a therapist in the San Diego area that runs divorce groups. I believe her website is HAMSA Healing.
Okay.
But similarly, if someone wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to provide resources for this one therapist that I know of that runs divorce groups.
Okay. Um, yeah, from my perspective, I'll say it's one of the things that I've actually, I think, had a hard time finding for clients when they've asked. There's not a lot. And sometimes I've heard it's because people don't show up. And so then they don't, therapists don't keep doing them. I think that oftentimes I've directed, sometimes searching, because if it's specifically the area you're in, like Christina mentions, there's a therapist who does it in San Diego. There are some in different areas around the state that might do them. And also, sometimes reaching out to some of the therapy practices that might be like larger practices. Sometimes they might be doing some support groups, and maybe it's not even divorce specific, but it's transitions, or it's something that they may still find useful. Ben, do you have anything to add on that?
No, but I
No.
appreciate the resources that India and Christina have, because I generally just tell people go to a therapist, don't go to a divorce counseling group. I'm always a little reluctant
Yeah.
to recommend speaking to multiple people, because it's already bad enough when clients come in with a chat
Mm,
GPT attorney and they go, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I can tell you 95% of it is not accurate for their particular situation. So to
yeah.
hear other perspectives, while I see benefit to that, I'm also a little bit cautious, because their situations might not be what my clients are going through, and they might get in their heads that something else should be happening when that's not appropriate at all.
Yeah, that is a good point. I think that it's, what is the support group around? Because, I get the same thing. I get people saying, well, my friend got this when she got divorced. And then you have to kind of explain, well, you have different scenario, different situations and all of that. So we are almost coming up on our time here. It's flown by. But just a kind of a few things to, wrap us up is, our whole goal is through this information and education is to, help you guys as therapists to empower your clients that if they are breaking up, right, that they do it better and they're building new beginnings. That it is divorce represents, it's a journey of growth. It's loss and opportunity. And so as therapists, you can be essential guides through this transformation, that you can understand the collaborative approach, that hopefully you're able to understand a little bit better after today of who you might refer your clients to when they need something specific, that you might not be the person doing that, and what that looks like. And then, just being able to equip yourself with those insights to help transform your clients' divorce experiences as they go through it. So I wanted to thank my panelists here today. Thank you, Christina, Ben, India. I've put everyone's contact information here, and we will post this on the original website and send it out so you guys have it. I know I don't speak just for myself, and that any of them would be happy to speak with anyone who's interested, has more questions, anything like that. Please feel free to reach out. And then when I end the webinar, you will see on your screen a link that you'll want to click on, that will take you to the course evaluation. And then that will get you your certificate once you've filled that out. If you have any issues or questions, you can let us know. And then lastly, all of us are actually physically in San Diego, although I know most of us work with clients throughout California, and maybe not as much if they're actually in a court litigation. But Christina, as I mentioned, is a therapist in Encinitas and has a great space there that she does stuff with therapists. And her and I are going to do an in-person CE session, kind of diving deeper just on the therapist and mediation side. And that's going to be in April. And of course, we changed it and I forgot to write down the date. Christina, do you have that? Oh, let's see. We're going to do April 17th. So Friday, April 17th. We'll post more information on the website, the same place you registered here. But if anyone is local in San Diego and would like to join, we'd love to see you. So thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Share.